The winter of 1879 had ground Willow Creek to dust. 3 months, not a single drop of rain. The crops had turned to straw, the livestock to bone. Desperation was the only thing that felt thick in the air, a choking dust that coated everything and everyone. In the back room of Henley's Mercantile, the air smelled of stale whiskey and fear. 19-year-old Flora Bellamy sat on a rickety wooden chair, her knuckles white as she twisted the frayed hem of her shawl. She was trying not to look at the man across the table, Hoy Bramblelet. His smile was all gold teeth and malice, gleaming in the weak lamplight. He slid a stack of papers toward her. "Your mark right there, girl," he purred, his voice like gravel stirred with oil. He tapped a yellowed line with a fat finger, a gaudy ring winking on it. "Your guardian's debts are significant. This little arrangement makes everyone happy." He was lying. No one would be happy, especially not Flora. Sheriff Moxley stood by the door, a statue of discomfort. His badge caught the light as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He stared at a spot on the floor, anywhere but at Flora's face. "It's all legal," he mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Indentured servitude for debt payment. 7 years of your service, and the slate's wiped clean." 7 years. Flora knew what service to a man like Bramblelet meant. The last girl he'd taken for a debt had been found floating in Cottonwood Creek 6 months later. The marks on her body hadn't come from honest work. Her own guardian, her uncle, the man who was supposed to protect her, was slumped against the hitching post outside, too deep in a bottle to even witness the sale of his own niece. He'd signed everything away to cover his gambling losses. He'd signed her away. "My guardian has no right," Flora whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the heavy silence. "I am a person, not property." Bramblelet's gold-toothed grin didn't falter. It widened. "Oh, but he does, Miss Bellamy. Every legal right. Been your protector since that fire took your folks. And now, I'm his protector." He leaned forward, his whiskey-soaked breath washing over her, hot and foul. "The transfer becomes official at noon tomorrow, unless, of course, someone can produce $2,000 by then." He chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "But we both know that's not going to happen, don't we, pretty thing? $2,000. It might as well have been $2 million. No one in Willow Creek had that kind of money. Except Bramblelet himself." He stood, adjusting the tight silk vest over his considerable belly. "You've got tonight to prepare. Pack nothing. Where you're going, you won't need anything of your own." He and the sheriff left her there, alone in the dim light with the contract that had just stolen her life. Outside, the wind began to howl, a lonely, mournful sound that promised a storm was coming. The next day, the noon sun was a merciless hammer beating down on the dusty main street of Willow Creek. The crowd gathered like buzzards, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They'd built a small wooden platform in front of the saloon, an auction block. Flora Bellamy stood on it, trembling, her hands clutching the worn fabric of her only good dress. This wasn't a cattle auction. It was something far, far worse. Hoy Bramblelet leaned against a porch post across the street, polishing his gold teeth with a toothpick, enjoying the show. His prize. The town watched, a sea of uncomfortable faces. Sheriff Moxley stood at the base of the platform, looking like a man about to read his own death sentence. He was going to hand a terrified girl over to the most brutal man in 3 counties to settle a debt. Flora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Just a few months ago, she was dreaming of being a schoolteacher. Now, she was livestock. Bramblelet's cold eyes crawled over her, making her skin feel thin and dirty. He was calculating his investment. Everyone knew what happened to women who fell into his hands, but the law was the law, even when it stank worse than a week-old corpse. Bramblelet finally pushed himself off the post, his spurs jingling a death knell with each confident step. The crowd parted for him, Not out of respect, but out of fear. Fear cleared a path just as well as any Moses. Flora's legs felt like they were about to buckle. She saw her future approaching, and it was wearing a silk vest and a cruel smile. She thought about running. But where? The desert stretched out in every direction, an unforgiving sea of sand and rock. She had no one, no family, no money, no hope. Her guardian was in the crowd somewhere, hidden, too much of a coward to watch what his weakness had wrought. Bramblelet reached the first step of the platform. He started to raise his hand to take her. That's when a voice cut through the hot, still air like a razor. "Hold on there, Hoy." Every single head in the street turned. There, at the edge of the crowd, stood a man nobody ever wanted to see. Dwayne Ellerby, the man everyone tried to avoid. His face was weathered granite, his gray eyes fixed on Bramblelet with an intensity that could curdle milk. Ellerby was a ghost, a legend whispered about in saloons. They said he'd killed 3 men with his bare hands. They said he'd burned down a corrupt sheriff's office in Deadwood. He lived alone on a ranch miles from town, and folks said he lived there with ghosts. Bramblelet's smug expression flickered for a half-second. Just a crack in the facade before it hardened again. He'd been itching for a confrontation with Ellerby for years, ever since the man had humiliated him in a high-stakes poker game. "Well, well," Bramblelet sneered, his hand dropping to rest casually on the butt of his pistol. "The hermit crawls out of his hole. You got no business here, Ellerby. This is a legal transaction." Ellerby started walking. He didn't hurry. His boots made no sound on the packed dirt. The crowd melted away from his path, creating a wide, empty lane right to the platform. The silence was so thick you could have choked on it. Even the horses tied to the hitching posts seemed to hold their breath. "The business I got here," Ellerby said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the street, "is that the debt's been paid." A gasp went through the crowd, a ripple of disbelief. Sheriff Moxley took a hesitant step forward, his face a mask of confusion. The lawman had seen his share of standoffs, and the air right now was electric, ready to explode. "Now hold on, Dwayne," the sheriff said, trying to sound authoritative. "This here is a legal matter. The girl's guardian owes Hoy near $2,000. That's more money than this whole town sees in a year." Ellerby didn't even look at him. His cold gray eyes were still locked on Bramblelet. He reached slowly into his long duster coat. Several men in the crowd flinched, their hands going to their own weapons. But Ellerby didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a heavy leather pouch that clinked with the sound of gold. He tossed it into the dust at the sheriff's feet. It landed with a heavy, final thud that echoed off the silent storefronts. "Count it," Ellerby said. Flora stared, her mind reeling. The sheriff knelt, his hands fumbling with the drawstring. He tipped the pouch, and a river of gold eagles spilled out into the dust, blazing in the midday sun. More money than she had ever seen, more than she could even imagine. The light flashed off the coins, dancing across the stunned faces of the townspeople. Bramblelet's face was turning a mottled, ugly shade of red. His perfect, cruel plan was falling apart right in front of everyone, and he was being upstaged by the one man he hated most in the world. But Hoy Bramblelet was not a man who accepted defeat. "That's real touching, Ellerby," he snarled, his hand now gripping the handle of his Colt. "But this ain't about money no more. We had a legal agreement. The girl is mine." The crowd began to shrink back. Mothers grabbed their children and pulled them into doorways. Shopkeepers vanished from their stoops. This was about to get bloody. Only Flora remained frozen on the platform, caught between a terrifying salvation and an even more terrifying doom. Ellerby took one more step, then another. He was close now. So close that the space between them was charged with violence, an intimate, deadly space where only one of them could walk away. But neither of them, not the hardened killer nor the vicious tyrant, was ready for what Flora was about to do. A truth she'd held secret her whole life. A truth that was about to change everything. Her voice, though trembling, rang out over the street, clear and strong and impossible to ignore. "He's my father." The words landed like a physical blow. Every whisper died. Every movement ceased. It was as if the whole world had stopped turning. 20 years of secrets, buried deep in the dry dirt of Willow Creek, were suddenly clawing their way into the harsh light of day. Dwayne Ellerby's stone-cold expression finally, for the first time anyone could remember, cracked. His weathered hand, the one that wasn't near his gun, trembled. He looked up at the girl on the platform, really looked at her, and he saw it. Everyone saw it. The same fierce gray eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. The way she squared her shoulders when she was cornered, it was like looking at a ghost. Sheriff Moxley's jaw hung open. That ain't possible," he stammered. "Dwayne Ellerby ain't got no family. Everybody knows that." But Flora was already scrambling down from the platform, her movements clumsy with desperation. "My mother was Dixie Moorhead," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "She worked at the hotel 20 years ago. Before she died, she told me. She told me who my real father was." The crowd, forgetting their fear, began to press in again, hungry for the scandal. This was better than a hanging. This was history. Bramblelet's face had gone from red to a sickly, pale white. His whole world was detonating. He'd wanted the girl to settle a debt. But more than that, he'd wanted her because she was beautiful, and he liked breaking beautiful things. Now she wasn't just some orphan. She was Ellerby's daughter. "You're lying," he spat, but the words had no force. Dixie Moorhead was a cheap saloon girl who'd take $1 from any man in this territory. Ellerby moved faster than a striking snake. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next his fist connected with Bramblelet's jaw with a sickening crack, like an axe splitting green wood. Bramblelet spun around twice from the force of the blow before crumpling into the dust, blood pouring from his split lip. "Watch your mouth when you speak about her," Ellerby growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. He stood over Bramblelet's stunned form. "Dixie was worth 10 of you." Flora reached them just as Bramblelet, groaning, pushed himself to his hands and knees. His hand automatically went for his gun, but Sheriff Moxley was suddenly between them, his own pistol drawn and pointed at the ground. A warning. "That's enough," the lawman yelled, finding his voice at last. "Everybody just calm down before somebody gets killed." Bramblelet wiped a smear of blood from his chin with the back of his hand. His eyes burned with a humiliation so profound it was terrifying. Being knocked down in front of the entire town was one thing. But being knocked down defending the honor of a dead woman he'd once coveted. That was an insult that could only be answered with blood. He staggered to his feet and began backing toward his horse. "This ain't over, Ellerby," he snarled, his voice thick with hate. "Not by a long shot. That girl owes me a debt, and I always collect what's mine." He swung himself onto his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and unanswered threats hanging in the air. Flora was left standing face to face with the father she had never known, a stranger who had just saved her life. But the reunion she might have dreamed of was about to turn into a nightmare. They had no idea what Bramblelet had left behind, or what he was riding to get. The crowd began to drift away, but their whispers followed Flora and Ellerby like ghosts. He stood before her, this man who could face down killers without flinching, but now seemed terrified by the hopeful look in his own daughter's eyes. "Dixie," he finally managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. She never told you anything else?" The weight of 20 lost years seemed to settle on his shoulders, pressing him down. Flora shook her head, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her, hope and fear and a strange, unexpected sense of belonging. "Just your name. She said you were a good man who got a bad reputation." She made me promise I'd never look for you. Her voice trailed off. Unless, Ellerby prompted gently, unless I had no other choice. The raw honesty of it hit him harder than the punch he'd thrown. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, and she'd only come to him out of pure desperation. 20 years he'd spent hiding from the world, and now he saw it for what it was, the coward's way out. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but before he could, Zadie Henley, the mercantile owner's wife, came sprinting down the street, her skirts hiked up in her hands, her face pale with panic. She skidded to a stop in front of the sheriff, gasping for air. "Sheriff Moxley, you gotta come quick. There's riders coming, at least a dozen of them, and they're flying Bramblelet's colors." The blood drained from Ellerby's face. He knew Bramblelet wasn't the type to accept defeat. But bringing an army back to Willow Creek, that wasn't just a fight, that was a massacre. He was planning to burn the whole town to the ground to get what he wanted. Sheriff Moxley swore and checked the loads in his pistol. He glanced around the now empty street. Most of the townsfolk had vanished, sensing that the real trouble was only just beginning. "How much time we got, Zadie?" Moxley asked, his voice grim. "Maybe 10 minutes, Sheriff. They're riding hard, and they look mean." Ellerby's mind was already racing, calculating odds, planning escape routes. 1 man against a dozen was suicide. He could grab Flora and run, disappear into the hills where no one could find them, abandon the town, let them fend for themselves. It should have been an easy choice. He'd spent 2 decades looking out for no one but himself. But then he looked at his daughter, and in her eyes he didn't see fear. He saw anger, a burning, righteous fury. She was looking at him not like a savior, but like a partner. She expected him to fight. The distant thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, a drumming that promised violence and death. "Flora, get behind the water trough. Now," he ordered, his voice sharp. She didn't move. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Those men are coming for me. I'm not going to let innocent people die because of it." A strange mix of terror and pride swelled in Ellerby's chest. She had Dixie's courage and his own stubbornness. It was a combination that could get them both killed. After 20 years of avoiding being a father, his first real conversation with his daughter might just be his last. Sheriff Moxley moved to stand beside Ellerby, his rifle now resting in the crook of his arm. "You know, Ellerby," he said, a grudging respect in his voice, "I always figured you for a loner. Never thought I'd see you make a stand for anyone." "Neither did I," Ellerby admitted, checking his own pistol for what felt like the 100th time. "But some things, I guess, are worth dying for." Then they appeared at the end of the street, a vision from hell. 12 riders, fanned out in a line, with Hoy Bramblelet at their head on a massive black stallion. Dust swirled around them like the smoke of battle, and the late afternoon sun glinted off rifle barrels and pistol handles. This wasn't just about Flora anymore. Ellerby could see it in Bramblelet's eyes. This was about power. It was about making an example out of Willow Creek, a message that would be heard across the whole territory. You do not cross Hoy Bramblelet. The riders spread out, effectively sealing off the street. Ellerby could see the glint of rifle barrels poking out from the windows of the mercantile and the saloon. The people of Willow Creek might be scared, but they weren't entirely helpless. Bramblelet dismounted slowly, dragging out the moment, savoring it. His split lip was swollen and purple, twisting his smile into an even more grotesque mask. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with venom. "The great Dwayne Ellerby, making his last stand over a bastard child." Ellerby's hand twitched toward his gun, but instead of drawing, he did something that stunned everyone, Bramblelet most of all. He smiled, a cold, thin, dangerous smile that reminded the older men in town why they had feared him for 2 decades. "Hoy," he said, his voice calm and even. "Before you start shooting up my town, there's something you ought to know about that debt you're so eager to collect." Bramblelet's arrogance faltered for just a moment. "What are you talking about, Ellerby?" "The money. The money your gambling house took from Flora's guardian to create that debt in the first place." Ellerby let the silence hang for a beat. "It came from stolen silver, federal silver, which makes you, and every man riding with you, an accessory to a federal crime." The words hit Bramblelet's men like a physical shock. You could see the confidence drain right out of them. Federal crime. That was a whole different game. The silver mine robbery 3 months back had been the talk of the territory. Federal marshals were crawling all over, and the reward for information was enough to make a man risk anything. "You're lying," Bramblelet snarled, but his voice was an octave too high. He glanced at his men and saw the doubt in their eyes. Their loyalty was to his money, not to his pride, and no amount of money was worth a federal hanging. Ellerby reached slowly, deliberately, into his vest pocket. He pulled out a small, heavy object and held it up for all to see. It was a silver ingot, and even from a distance, they could all see the clear, sharp stamp of the United States Federal Mint. "Found this in the safe at your gambling house 2 weeks ago," Ellerby said, his voice as smooth as silk. "Been wondering what to do with it. Funny thing about federal silver, Hoy. It has a way of making people remember things they'd rather forget." It was a magnificent lie. The ingot was from his own small, legitimate claim in the hills, but Bramblelet didn't know that. All he knew was that Ellerby had it, and that was enough. 3 of his riders at the end of the line exchanged nervous glances, then slowly began to back their horses away. They were done. A federal noose wasn't part of their contract. "Even if that's true," Bramblelet said, his voice cracking with desperation, "it don't change nothing. The girl still owes me." "No, she don't," Sheriff Moxley cut in, stepping forward. He seemed to have grown a spine in the last 10 minutes. "A debt settled with stolen money ain't a legal debt, Hoy, and you damn well know it." Flora watched in awe as her father dismantled an armed posse without firing a single shot. He was turning them against each other with nothing but words and a piece of silver. But she could see the look in Bramblelet's eyes. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. He was losing everything, and his desperation was turning into pure murderous rage. His hand shot to his gun. "I don't care about federal silver. I don't care about legal debts. I came for the girl, and I ain't leaving without her." The remaining riders tightened their grips on their rifles, but their hearts weren't in it. They were hired guns, not fanatics. Dying for their boss's wounded pride wasn't what they'd signed up for. Ellerby took another step forward, closing the distance until only a few yards separated him from Bramblelet. His gray eyes were like chips of ice. "Then you're not leaving at all, Hoy." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. It was a challenge. Single combat. Winner take all. It was an old code, a bloody tradition, but one that was understood and respected. The remaining riders visibly relaxed. A fair fight between the 2 men would settle this. No federal charges, no massacre, just one man against another. They'd get to watch a legend at work, and then they could ride away, no matter who was left standing. But Hoy Bramblelet had never fought a fair fight in his life. He nodded, a slow, cunning smile spreading across his swollen face. "A fair fight, Ellerby. Just you and me." He let his hand drop away from his gun. But as the 2 men squared off in the dusty street, a predator's instinct honed by years of survival screamed a warning in Flora's mind. Her eyes darted around, scanning the rooftops, the alleyways, and then she saw it. A flash of deadly light. A glint of metal from the flat roof of Henley's Mercantile. A hidden rifleman, taking careful aim. Flora's sharp eyes caught the glint of the setting sun on a rifle barrel, just as the sniper's finger was tightening on the trigger. 20 years of living on the edge had taught her to see things other people missed, and what she saw right now was about to murder the father she'd only just found. "Dwayne, get down!" she screamed. She didn't even think. She launched herself forward, a desperate flying tackle aimed at her father's legs. At the exact same moment, the rifle on the roof cracked, a sound that split the sky. The bullet that was meant for Ellerby's heart tore through his shoulder instead, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. Blood bloomed across his shirt, a dark, spreading flower. He was alive, but he was hit. Bramblelet's face lit up with a look of pure, savage joy. The sniper was his insurance policy, his guarantee of victory. "Looks like the great Dwayne Ellerby ain't so tough after all," he sneered, and this time his hand moved with lightning speed, drawing his Colt pistol. But Flora was already moving. Scrambling in the dust, her hand closed around the heavy, familiar weight of her father's gun, which had fallen when he did. In one fluid, practiced motion, she rose to her knees, leveled the big pistol at Bramblelet's chest, and pulled back the hammer. The metallic click echoed in the sudden, shocked silence. Her hands were rock steady. Her gray eyes, so like her father's, blazed with a cold fire that made Brambolet freeze in his tracks. "You want to finish this?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Then finish it fair." The street exploded into chaos. Sheriff Moxley was yelling, trying to spot the sniper while keeping his own gun trained on Brambolet's remaining men. The townsfolk who had been peeking from windows were now diving for cover. Somewhere up above, a killer was reloading for a second shot. Brambolet let out a laugh, but it was a high, hysterical sound. "You think I'm afraid of you? Some little girl playing with her daddy's gun? You probably don't even know which end the bullets come out of." Flora didn't flinch. "My mother taught me to shoot when I was 12, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "She said a woman in this territory needed to know how to protect herself, from men exactly like you." The sheer confidence in her voice gave Brambolet pause. This wasn't the terrified girl from the auction block. This was Dixie Moorhead's daughter, raised hard and taught to survive. The resemblance to her mother in that moment was so strong, it was like seeing a ghost. It brought back memories Brambolet had tried to bury for 2 decades, memories of a woman he'd wanted and couldn't have, a woman who had chosen the quiet, dangerous drifter over him. Ellerby struggled to his feet, leaning against a hitching post, his left arm hanging useless at his side. The world was starting to swim, but he gritted his teeth against the pain. Watching his daughter face down a killer filled him with a terror and a pride so fierce it almost took his breath away. "Flora," he gasped, "get behind cover. Let me handle this." "No," she said, and her eyes never left Brambolet. "You've been handling things alone for 20 years. It's time you had someone watching your back." The rifle cracked again from the rooftop. But this time, Sheriff Moxley was ready. He'd seen the puff of smoke. His own rifle barked in response, and a scream echoed from above as the hidden gunman toppled from the roof, hitting the street with a sickening thud. Now it was just Brambolet and his last 5 nervous riders, against a wounded legend, a determined girl with a gun, and a town that was finally finding its courage. But Brambolet still had one more card to play, one last cruel piece of poison. His eyes darted around the street, his mind working furiously. His sniper was dead. His men were wavering. A girl who looked like the ghost of his past was holding a gun on him with a killer's steadiness. This was his last chance to break them. "You want to know something interesting about your precious father?" Brambolet yelled, his voice carrying across the silent street, a desperate, venomous last attack. "Ask him about the Bellamy family. Ask him why he really ran away and hid from the world for 20 years. Ellerby's face went white as a sheet, and this time it wasn't from blood loss. "Don't," he warned, his voice a choked whisper. But Brambolet was already shouting, his words like bullets aimed to kill not the body, but the soul. "Tell her, Dwayne. Tell your daughter how you murdered an entire family in a card game gone wrong. Tell her why there are still bounty hunters with your name on their lips." Bellamy. The name hit Flora like a physical blow, her own name. Her gun hand wavered for a fraction of a second. She stared at her father, at the sudden agony on his face. This was the dark secret he'd been hiding from. This was the ghost that haunted him. Bramblelet saw her hesitation and pressed his advantage. "He's a killer, girl, a cold-blooded murderer. He left you and your mother to rot so he could save his own skin." But then Flora's eyes met her father's. She saw the pain there, the shame, the 20 years of self-loathing, and she saw something else. Regret. A deep, soul-crushing regret. Her hand steadied. The gun came back up, pointed directly at Bramblelet's black heart. "I don't care what he did before," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that stunned every person on that street. "I care about who he is right now." That simple act of faith, of unconditional acceptance, was something Ellerby hadn't allowed himself to hope for in 2 decades. It was a pardon he never thought he'd receive. It was his daughter, giving him back his soul. Sheriff Moxley saw his opening. He moved toward Bramblelet's last few men. "It's over, boys," he called out, his voice firm. "Your boss is done. Ride out of here now, and we'll forget we ever saw you." 3 more riders took the offer. They wheeled their horses around and galloped away without a backward glance. They'd signed on for a fight, not to be witnesses at their boss's psychological immolation. Now only 2 men remained, and they looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Bramblelet's final, desperate gamble had backfired spectacularly. He'd tried to poison Flora against her father, and instead, he'd forged their bond in iron. The girl standing before him wasn't just Dixie's daughter anymore. She was Dwayne's too, and she had all the courage and stubbornness that came with it. "Last chance, Hoy," Ellerby grunted, forcing himself to stand tall despite the fire in his shoulder. "Ride away. We call it even." For a long moment, Bramblelet just stood there, his face a twisted mask of rage and disbelief. He could see it was over. His men were gone. The town was against him. He was facing a wounded legend and his Spitfire daughter. A smart man would have taken the offer. But Hoy Bramblelet was not a smart man. He was a creature of pride and hate. "I would rather die," he snarled, "than be humiliated by some bastard child and her outlaw father." He raised his pistol, aiming it straight at Flora. He never fired. 3 shots exploded almost as one, from Flora's pistol, from Ellerby's other hand, where he'd drawn a second, smaller gun from his boot, and from Sheriff Moxley's rifle. Hoy Bramblelet was thrown backward as if hit by a physical wave, his gun flying from his hand. He hit the dust with a final shuddering sigh, his reign of terror over at last. His last 2 men threw their guns down and raised their hands high. The street fell completely silent, the only sound Ellerby's ragged breathing and the lonely whistle of the wind. Flora dropped her father's heavy pistol and ran to his side as his legs finally gave out, and he sank to his knees. "We need to get you to the doctor," she said, her voice thick with tears as she supported his weight. "In a minute," Ellerby gasped, looking up at her. His eyes, so full of pain just moments before, were now shining with a fierce, unbelievable pride. First, there's something I need to say. Something I should have said 20 years ago." "What's that?" she whispered. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tearing out of him. "I'm sorry I wasn't there, and I am proud as hell to be your father." The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The dead would be buried, and the town would heal. But for Dwayne and Flora Ellerby, standing in the dust of Main Street, this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of making up for all the lost time in the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another one.